Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Frank Reid from the Cornhusker Fly Fishers up in Omaha, Nebraska, Omaha and Lincoln. And what I'd like to tie today is a crawdad pattern. It's called Frank's Fighting Craw. Now, the Frank's Fighting Craw, we use a slightly different hook, and it's called a Mustad 37-160, also called an English bait hook or a kale hook. I'm using a size 10 today. And I put it into the vise, and with the first bend of the hook parallel with the ground, with the tying table. So what we do is tie in your thread right at the second bend, the middle bend of the hook. Just nip it off. And I'm using a dark colored thread because I want to contrast with the light color of the shell that I'm going to be putting on later. So the first thing with a crawdad that you might notice is it has little feelers. So I take a little bit of deer hair and tie it in at the tips, just a small clump. You know, this has about 10 fibers in there. And I tie it at the bottom of the hook. Splays out at the back. I clear them off. And the second part we see with the crawdad is the antenna. I use a silicone rubber leg, and this is about a third of the rubber leg, about 1.5 inches long. And I just double it over the hook inside the gap, and I pull it away from me at a 45-degree angle. The reason I do that is that when I tie it on, and you've pulled it away from you at a 45, you release it, and it comes right directly underneath the hook. So it keeps you from having to reposition your antenna. So now that we have the antenna and the feelers, what we need is eyes. I use a plastic bead chain. I don't want a lot of weight at the forward end of the hook, so the plastic bead chain serves the purpose of giving us eyes, and it's also a tie-in point without a lot of weight. So next thing I need is the shell. You can go to Wapsi or whomever and buy plastic raffia. Plastic raffia is a wonderful material. Use the plastic, not the regular Swiss straw, which is a natural material. The plastic is what you're looking for. So I tie the plastic raffia in right behind the eyes and just kind of wrap it around. I don't worry about the extra material there. It's all going to be covered up. And then I do a little wrap right in front of the eyes and lock that down. Bring the thread back behind the eyes. And now I need something to form the body. I use chenille. Now use the chenille. What you were trying to do is make this crawdad match the colors of the crawdad in your water. And I use variegated. Variegated gives me the lighter color of the bottom of the crawdad. And it just kind of gives that little camouflage pattern that true crawdads have. And I just tie in behind the eye. One other thing the crawdad has is claws. I'm using a pine squirrel zonker, and you go to the end, you look where the fur is following forward, and you take about 3/4 inch and you separate, maybe 1/2 inch, and you separate out the fur so you're down to the skin. You can see the skin right there, and you just nip it off right at the skin. Then you take your piece that you've already cut and you lay it up against that strip, and you're just trying to match some size here. And you go back to the end of the other one and you pull back till you get to the skin again. And you nip it off again. Now, we're going to tie these claws on. We have the pointed fur is away from the hook, so the base of the fur, and we just tie it in behind the eye at a perpendicular to the hook, so it sticks straight out. And we just lay that on there and give it a few wraps. We want it to be secure. And we take the second part and we do the opposite side. since there's a lot of wraps of thread right there and the skin, I want this to lock down a little bit better. So I use the secret sauce, head cement, or I prefer Sally Hansen hard as nails. So the body is the chenille, and we'll take that and bring it forward to the eyes and wrap it right in front of the eyes. What that does is serves to bring the antenna and the feelers up in line with the hook. Bring it back around in between the claws on the back. What that does is it'll keep the claws separate, because we want those claws out to give that cross pattern. Wrap it around once, behind the eye, behind the hook, behind the claws, and just wrap the thread around just to catch it up. Now, let's bring the shell back, which is the plastic raffia. We just bring it straight up, and at that same point where we just tied in the chenille, if I can get my chenille out of the way, we wrap the thread around. Just give it a couple of little tight wraps there. And now we have a shell back for the crawfish. Now here comes the difficult part. Not for the faint of heart. You're going to actually loosen your hook in the vise. So we just grab a hold of the crawdad right around the eyes, slightly loosen the vise, push it down, and tighten it up. Now we have the hook shank horizontal, parallel with the tying surface. Just take some lead. This is 0.25 lead wire, and I just wrap the shank of the hook with the lead wire back about to the eye, nip it off, and what I want to do is kind of push it forward a little bit to give a little bit of space right at the eye of the hook. That's going to be our second major tie-in point. So what we do is we wrap our chenille back over, and there's the chenille back to the eye. Next thing is we pull the plastic raffia on top of the chenille. Now this is your thumbnail. You push the thumbnail in to the body, and you use that as a guide, just to guide where you want your thread. Move it back a little bit, a couple of wraps, move it back a little bit, a couple of wraps, move it back, and this is now, I see it's crushing down the plastic raffia, which means I'm behind the lead. So now I have a segmented body, and you see how the different colored, the darker thread has formed the nice little segments there in the fly. Now I can lift up the tail, give a couple of wraps of thread on the chenille, pull it away at a 90-degree angle from the thread so you don't cut your thread, nip it off. We're going to make that splayed tail by clipping out away from the body, away past the hook eye, and now you have a splayed tail. You lift up that tail, give a few wraps of thread, just locking everything down there. Whip finish. I will take and use 1 hour epoxy, not 5 minute. 5 minute epoxy will dry too quickly, it'll glob up. If you've got 24 of these that you're trying to put on your spinner to dry, what happens there is it'll start drying and you'll get globby epoxy on the back of your shell. So I just 1 hour epoxy on the shell, and make sure you get epoxy on the bottom of that tail and inside that tail. Because what happens with this crawdad is that tail forms like a little lip. And when you do pull it through the water, it's going to wiggle the crawdad.